First question then, if we start with trauma, what is it?
Yeah, it's a tough question, isn't it? I mean, partly it's semantics. Different people use the word in different ways. Say, oh, that was really traumatic, or when actually what they mean is very stressful, or there was lots of anxiety involved, or something like that. For me, a sort of a rule of thumb is if something happened back then, but you're still feeling it right now, that's trauma. So most of us will go through traumatic experiences in our lives, lose people, or we'll have a close call here, or we were bullied at school and that was bad. But when we think about it, the brain's processed it, we can think about it, we can talk about it, it doesn't really matter. Some people, these things happen, we haven't been able to process it for whatever reason, often because it's one trauma on top of another trauma on top of another, and it just reminds us of all the original traumas that we weren't able to process. And so normally, as a rule of thumb, I say to people, trauma is something that if you think about it now, or particularly if it's imposing itself on you now, where you don't want to think about it, but you're having flashbacks, or you're triggered, or you're having nightmares, or whatever. And when it comes with all the emotion, all the thoughts, all the feelings, everything, you're re-experiencing it, then trauma. Normally two types of trauma. So one's caused by a single event trauma, would be like a road traffic accident or something. And then often more common, I've found, is trauma that's built up over a period of time. So for example, if you were bullied at school, then each individual incident of being bullied might not have been that bad. You might not have been bullied every single day, but waking up every day, year after year after year, fearful, scared, terrified, cold sweats, sick in the pit of your stomach, that sort of cumulative effect, that can create trauma. And I think probably to talk about what's going on right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think if people are traumatised by it, it will be, my guess is, it will be because of that living in that heightened state of fight or flight, the panic response. So if I'm panicking about my kids are going to die, I'm going to die, my parents are going to die, everyone I know is going to die. Whether they do or they don't, if I wake up and I'm 24/7 with that heightened state of anxiety, the adrenaline, all the stuff pumping through my body, if that goes on long enough, it is traumatic to experience that. But if that endures, so technically speaking, we won't know whether it's trauma or not for maybe 6 months after, because a lot of that stuff will be processed when we go back to normal, whatever normal may or may not be. A lot of that stuff will be processed. But for some people, 6 months, a year, longer afterwards, they will still be having flashbacks. They'll still be getting cold sweats. They'll still be having nightmares. That would be considered trauma.
Yeah. Gosh, okay. And then some people are going to have immediate trauma, aren't they? Like, well, would it be loss of a job? Well, definitely loss of a loved one if someone dies from...
Yeah, and I think trauma, again, different people respond in different ways, don't they? So we can talk in generalities, but if you put 100 people in exactly the same situation, if you're really good, you'll get 100 different responses to it. So it is a personal thing how people respond to it. But often trauma comes with a sense of shock, unexpected. It comes with a sense of overwhelm. It comes with a sense of being out of control. One of the most traumatic thoughts, of course, is I am going to die, not in that generalised, we're all going to die, Jason, but in that actually right here, right now, this is it, my number's up, I'm going to die right now. That's a really traumatic thought. So for people maybe who catch COVID and then are in hospital, but then they recover, they could still be traumatised by that, but obviously losing other people. And that's where you get into an issue of, is it trauma? Is it grief? Is it loss? Is it, because bereavement itself is always painfully sad. Whenever it happens, whether it's expected or not. I've lost both my parents. My dad had cancer for 4 years, way too long. My mum was diagnosed on the Thursday, went into a coma on the Tuesday and died 2 days later, way too short. So there's never a good time to die, and there's never a good way to die, really, although there are better and worse. But sometimes grief, again, can go into trauma if we don't process it properly. And of course, what we can't do now, if people do die, We can't go to the funeral. We can't have the usual grieving. We can't have the wake. We can't all gather together. We can't all comfort each other and support each other in the way that we would normally. We have to experience it on our own. I've got a friend whose dad died recently, nothing to do with COVID, but it happened during the lockdown. He couldn't go to the funeral, so that's obviously added another layer to his grieving process. He can't go around and see his mum. He can't, all those things. So it's kind of layer upon layer upon layer, isn't it? That experiencing now, which is very different than we would have done 6 months ago.
So what can we do now, knowing that, and then what do you think we're going to have to do later to attend to that?
Yeah, easy questions you're asking.
Yeah, they are.
I think fundamentally, obviously, a lot of this stuff is all the usual stuffs that we would do. So if we're talking about grief, loss, trauma, whatever it might be, a lot of it is to do with support mechanisms. Do we have a support mechanism? Do we have people around us that we can talk to, who we can offload? Do we have somewhere we can go with it? That's always one of the questions that we ask as therapists. Who are your support mechanism? Do you have one? And often people in therapy don't, which is one of the main reasons why they are in therapy, because they don't have someone they can go and talk to. They don't have somewhere they can offload. And of course that becomes more difficult, particularly if you're living alone, haven't got a partner you can talk to about this stuff. You can't go to church, you can't go to small group, you can't meet in, all the people you would normally meet with. So it's finding ways that you can do that to try and replace these things. But the problem is some of these things you can't. Sometimes if you're grieving, there's nothing better than just giving someone a hug, is there? Sorry, no physical contact. Even if some therapists are still working and have continued to work. But again, you've got to keep your social distance. And it's the same if you do visit somebody, if you did decide, I want to go and see someone because they've gone through this terrible loss, get more than 6 feet close to them, don't hug them, don't touch them, don't, all those kind of things. So it will be difficult, it will. And then part of that comes down to us as individuals. How can we cope with that ourselves? And all the research on grief, really, all we know is two things. One is, if you lose someone or something that you loved, you will grieve, whether you like it or not. And the other thing we know is grief is better out than in. But apart from that, we don't really know a great deal about it. It's normal, it's natural, it happens. You have to go through the process. When it's done, it will be done. But how long that will be and how that will work, there's lots of other variables in that. But it is a very difficult time. It is, because people's normal structures have been removed. The normal things that we would do to cope with life have been removed. We're trying to find alternatives like Zoom, obviously, and other things. But it is different. And I think once it's over, people are kind of in that lockdown mentality, just get through. Once it's over and we can begin to breathe out, I think a lot of this stuff will come out then. So whatever we may or may not be going through now, from a professional point of view, I think the general consensus is that 6 months, a year more afterwards, we'll still be mopping up a lot of the stuff that actually is rooted in things that happened while we were all in lockdown.
Yeah, we're anticipating as a church, like a lot of people are, mental health needs, self-harm, the need for referrals to therapy, talking, relationships, courses, integration with things locally, support things in the church. I mean, spiritually, I think of things of lament. And I've noticed people talking about that, and notice in scripture when God's people go through the most awful circumstances and there isn't time to probably grieve because they have to get to somewhere to safety. Thinking of the escaping from Egypt would be an example. So lament later, that processing as a community before God, and the legitimacy of what you've lost and how it's affected you together and before God, I think. And our church traditions are probably similar. We're not really good at lamenting from an evangelical background, and I think we're going to have to lean into that. Have you? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the two things there that particularly strike, one is to be able to do it as a community, and one is to legitimate it. That feeling of, we are all struggling. It is all difficult. It is unprecedented. Much as that word has been overused, we don't have anything, or most of us haven't lived through anything
Yeah.
similar.